All right. Appreciate you, my guy, coming
Appreciate
in.
you.
All right. So, for those that don't know you, um, my guy Jason Lathan is here. How would you describe yourself? What would your title be,
um, my title would be
or just how do you refer to yourself?
I
I,
mean,
I would say you're a creative, you're a writer, you are a published author. Um,
yeah, I'm those things, sneakerhead, um, mental health advocate,
okay.
child of God, um, son, uncle, etc.
So me and you go way, way back.
Yeah, man.
You were, I think, my assistant manager, like one of my first jobs.
Yeah, finish line.
Yep. But then more importantly, even after that, we connected years later, like right before I moved to LA. I think you had a manuscript for a book,
Hmm.
and you allowed me to create a screenplay for it. And it's funny because I will never forget that time, because this is a time when, like, everybody wants to chase a dream, and like this is when Entourage was big, and me and a few of my friends, Bruce and a couple other people, we were all moving out to LA to try to make that dream happen. And not only was I like trying to pursue like the film production aspect of it, but like at that time, if people would ask me, I would have said I was just as much a writer as everything else. So during that time, I'm out there jumping back and forth, and I'm learning how to adapt a manuscript, trying to write a screenplay. And then at a certain point, when we got the screenplay done, we were trying to get it in front of people, and it was a crazy time looking back, and I've learned so
Hmm.
many lessons. But like we probably haven't talked as much in the last decade, but like your story will always be intertwined in my story, because you not only allowed me to tell your story, you actually like you were one of the first people to pay me to do something that I love to do. And it was a big part of like that time. Everybody's, I'm saying, their success story, everybody's journey when they're pursuing a dream, like they
Hmm.
have, like when it's on screen, you see like these montage of moments. And for me, a huge part of those moments in that montage is like trying to go from here to being in LA and all the stuff that was happening. And a lot of scenes include your story and how that just kind of tied into everything we were doing.
Yeah, and it continues, because like we were just talking, we ain't gave up. I ain't gave up on that movie dream
Hmm. Hmm.
because I think that you know the pursuit of the dream isn't. I mean, and success isn't necessarily Oscar winning. It's like
Right.
we got a screenplay.
Absolutely.
Not everybody can say that.
That's true. That is true. That is true. Yeah, and I feel like, yeah, at some point we will definitely have to circle back to it, because there's so much I've learned since then. Like
Same.
yeah, because on some, like on some aspects, like I'm really proud of it, but some aspects I'm like, oof. Like I get, like we got people, like I got people to read it, but like a lot of people I feel like read it like doing a favor to me. But like now I'm like, oh yeah, and like, for me as a screenwriter in, was it 2011, I like, yeah, I did the best I could at the time. But like
Exactly.
just like I look at back at I will look back at a lot of my videos, and I feel the same. Like, oof, I'm glad I know what I know now.
Hmm.
Because I'm worlds apart of from where I was.
Same. And I think that just the growth and the journey that we've been on. I mean, and I've been studying the art of storytelling myself and just learning just the whole concept of story. I mean, we can make it so much better.
Absolutely, absolutely. So after that, you ended up taking that manuscript and actually writing and publishing an actual book. For those out there that don't know, tell us the title of the book and kind of some of the things that you talked about in that book.
Well, the book is called Darkness Births Light, and I really talk about growing up here in Omaha, Nebraska, and I talk about some of the things I went through growing up as a black male in Omaha during the '80s, early '90s, and just some of the things that might have. I mean, some of the things look back on some of the things that were traumatic to me, some of the successes, highs, lows, learning about my mental health challenges and how I how to deal with those, and I look at it as in parts of the book, I'm the hero and the villain
Mhm.
because I
Mhm.
don't think any of us is ever always the hero.
Absolutely.
And even a villain has a reason why they're doing things.
Yep.
It may not make sense, but they
They
have
have
a
their
why
motivations.
also.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put my story, I felt like putting my story out there. I mean, I did intend on putting it out there at first. It was just more of a part of a healing process just to get it out of my head.
Mhm. You know, I what I appreciate it's for I mean, I guess it's my own doing in a sense. A lot of people, when they look at me and you, they wouldn't know how much we have in common based on how I present myself. So
Mhm.
what I always appreciated about your book is how, and this was more like, well, I'm sure when you started it, because this was 13 years ago then. So like I'm gonna say 15 years ago, you were already ahead of the curve as far as like learning how to channel your trauma and like your lessons and your hardships and being transparent and vulnerable enough to put that out there. And you spoke to a lot of things that I was feeling that I either just wasn't sharing or I didn't even know that I was feeling. So like I've always appreciated that. And I know that even though like when I met you, you were my boss and like we were never in the same circles like when I was growing up here, like we are connected on a lot of levels that I am not connected with other people. So I've always appreciated that. And it's funny, um, along with this podcast, like I'm probably gonna call it like therapy, not because I want this to be a therapy session, but like for me, I would imagine just like your book, regardless of what the topics are. Like I as of right now, like I'm gonna have bring people on that I'll know I will have genuine conversations with because I am just a guarded, introverted person.
Mhm.
But being able to have the conversation, this is probably going to be a not even a bit, but very on the nose with the subject matter. But
Mhm.
just to be able to have a forum to have conversations with certain people about different things is like therapy to me. And for me, it's even funny because, and we'll double back to this later, but I don't think I mentioned to you, but sometimes, um, when you go through things, you'll have a realization that makes everything else make sense.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I'll even put this part out, but I know I came to the realization in the last 6 months that in the next couple years, I obviously would love to have your insight on this when the time comes, but I will probably end up. I'm thinking about doing a documentary on mental health in the Black male community because there's just so much. For me, like I said, I definitely realized there were certain things that I was dealing with, but it wasn't until I had that time to myself in the pandemic. Like it was the first time in my life. Like I think you'll understand. Like as a Black man growing up in the Midwest, where we're behind on everything, especially like everything, but especially like mental health, and you grow up in a certain time
Mhm.
to where it's projected upon you that just for men in general, and especially in the Black community, like you have to carry yourself a certain way. You
Yeah.
don't, there's no room to feel this, to be this way, to share this. So for me, I realized that there was so much that I was dealing with. And for me, a lot of my escape from that was going to be, I put it in my work.
Mhm.
So like I would just create a new project or a new venture or just delve deeper into that. And so I would escape it from doing that, but also I would then find my worth in like my accomplishments.
Mhm.
And another layer of that is in the Midwest, like we're known for like just being good workers. We put our, nose head down and we just do the work. But
Mhm.
there's also aspect of that where we work ourselves to the bone. And I think
Man.
like we wear a lot of our traumas and like our unhealthy habits, like literally or metaphorically. So I'll say all that to say it wasn't until I was in LA where I was in a space that I was away from home and away from the programming and away from certain ways people expected me to be. I was in a place that was a little more forward thinking about mental health. And I was in a space where like I had time to myself and I literally couldn't do anything else that I actually started doing the inner work. And
Mhm.
I started opening boxes and figuring stuff out that I was like, oh damn, I am dealing with a lot. And it started making all of those things make sense. So then I realized where, okay, I've now had over a decade working in or around like film and entertainment with a lot of people. I was just working on a documentary for somebody in 2023, and it's like, okay, I have the equipment, I have the experience, and just like any good story, which you know how you said you've been studying like story and storytelling, like you know, it all comes. It not only all comes down to story, but like any good storyteller will find their niche in their authenticity. So it's
Hmm.
like, what do you have uniquely to tell? So I don't think it's a coincidence. Like something I always say to people is for men in general, but specifically black men, like the only place that we have, where's the only place that we feel safe to share at? If you had to say one place for black men,
Barbershop.
the barbershop. It's not a coincidence. I used to be a barber, so I understand that aspect of it. So like I was realizing like maybe, and then now being in LA, and I'm just now starting to like sow the seeds of building my own community out there and realizing what community is. And that's a whole different
Hmm.
aspect that
Oh
comes from like
yeah.
parents and relationships and all that. But I start to see, okay, maybe this journey, and I mean, there's other things that hopefully I am meant to do and pursue and achieve, but maybe a lot of these ups and downs are creating a through line for me to have done the work to realize whatever I'm dealing with myself and realize that there's another through line where other people are dealing with it, but they may not have somebody that could speak to it for them. So not only have I kind of built this network and this web of relationships, but I have the medium to tell the story and I have the skill set. But I am uniquely placed to do it. So like there may be a scenario where a couple years from now I will do that.
And I've actually had that same thought to do a documentary on health for black men because our experience is unique. I mean, just like our DNA is unique. I mean, there's similarities, but
Hmm.
the experience of black men is unique. And like you said, we are, I mean, we wear we we're known as workers here in the Midwest, but there's a lot of stuff that we're hiding. Like, I mean, I didn't wear this shirt just to like give a shout out to anybody. I
Hmm.
mean, there's a story in this. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. We'll
Right.
get to probably get to that, but I think a lot of us as black men, one of the things that we hide is we wish we were something different from what
Absolutely.
we actually are. And we hide so in order to mask that, we might try to throw ourselves into projects or the
Hmm.
gym, or we might throw ourselves in the bed with multiple women just to try to be something else other than what we actually are, because what we actually are is hurting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's no better way to say that than that is absolutely true. I think that's a societal thing in general, like most of the world is to an extent, but there's not a lot of space for men to feel that way, but definitely like black men. So yeah. And we're conditioned. But another thing I realized, um, you'll probably understand this, but like my parents had me late. They were born in 39 and 40.
Oh
So
man.
that makes me realize like I am only literally a few generations removed from when we were actually still slaves. So that level of trauma that is passed down that hasn't been dealt with, and even for me, so I feel like for me, like my sisters are as old as a lot of my friends' parents. So like
Mm,
I feel like I missed out on a generation's worth of growth of parenting
mm-hmm.
from my parents, which I love, and I love the fact that like I still have them with me, and like I can get insight from them from another generation gone that most kids couldn't get. But on the other end is that lack of growth, because if it wasn't a thing for us to be able to talk about mental health,
Oh my
for them
gosh.
to even know what mental health was, to know what trauma is, to know where a lot of the way they were treated or parented or weren't parented, where that stems from, and not to say it all stems from slavery or racism, all that, but there's a through line through all of it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, there's definitely an element of that that I want to explore.
But I was talking to my mom, and she was saying that she was telling me about the year 1960. I mean, a little bit of backstory of my mom. She was born in Byhalia, Mississippi.
Hmm.
So I'm literally the first generation of my family that didn't have to pick cotton.
Mm.
So what you were just saying about the through line is real.
Hmm.
And she was talking about how her and my aunt were talking about how that year the crop wasn't good, so they very nearly starved. And I mean, I'm just thinking about just the trauma of that. I mean, the food insecurity.
Hmm.
And she was telling me that um she a lot of I mean, she just wanted to go to school because going to school would take her mind off of the fact that I mean, she would be hungry,
Right.
but they didn't even have anything to take for lunch to eat, but she still wanted to go to school. So I think that I mean, just thinking about growing up, the food insecurity, the racism in Mississippi, which
Hmm.
was very real and
Yeah.
very prevalent. Um, you're talking about 4 to a bed.
Right.
I mean, so she talked about how she was determined that when she grew up and had kids, they'd always have food to eat, a bed of their own to sleep in,
Hmm.
and um, just things like wouldn't have to go to the bathroom in an outhouse, for example.
Right.
So when you think about that, if your basic needs aren't taken care of, when you think about
Yeah.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you ain't eating, if you ain't got a roof and you ain't got shelter, I mean, you ain't got time to think about emotional or mental health.
Absolutely. And I think you probably understand this too. Like we'll see that in our parents when we try to like discuss some of the things we're dealing with
Yeah.
in their hierarchy of needs, how we feel or how something made us feel is nothing to them based on what they had to deal with, which is very valid, but it doesn't help us grow or help us do things. It doesn't help us overcome what we're feeling. But that is something that we're always challenged with because I know for me, you know, my mom was born in Mississippi. The time they were born and raised in, like when they were coming of age, that was literally in the middle of the civil rights era. So it's like
Yeah.
to say, "Oh, I feel this way," or "You make me feel this way." To discuss feelings with your parents that actually were seeing like physical violence like perpetrated on them yeah, I mean, every day, yeah,
Mhm.
if not nothing else, like, on the news, and especially, like, probably when your mom was a child,
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
so for them, that's gonna be a disconnect, and it's just one of those things to where it's sad because both sides are valid, but I think there has to be a conversation that kind of bridges that gap and beyond that generation now, but just between all of the generations, anybody that's still around, because you can clearly see why they won't feel that way because of what they went through.
Mhm.
And it's always all this generation soft, which to this extent, our generation and the generations after may have been. And I was having a conversation with Bruce, and it's always that quote of hard times create strong people create easy times create like weak people. It's that whole thing that happens, but
Mhm.
that's why, which is the good thing about our culture, what used to be a good thing about our culture, there's always like the conversations that and the information that's passed down. But I think as we're getting older and time is going forward, we're losing that, like that campfire talk, or there's always like in the tribes there's always that person that shares the information.
Mhm.
So maybe it is on people like us that have it on our hearts and like have a desire to um, excel in certain mediums to be the voice and to tell those stories. So
I think it is because people will listen to us.
hmm.
People will listen to us because we look like somebody that they can relate to. I mean, you know, one of the reasons I wrote my book, and we might be jumping ahead a little bit, is because like you might hear someone like this, for example, Dwayne the Rock Johnson talk about dealing with depression.
Hmm.
Now, I'm probably not going to be able to go across the street and have a conversation with The Rock. I would
Right.
love to,
Right.
but it's not likely. But somebody like me, I mean, guy that's working 40 hours a week, active in church, going to the gym, just trying to pay bills. I mean, day by day, just dealing. People can relate to that.
Hmm.
People can relate to somebody like you and me. I mean,
And I would argue, not growing up, but having lived in the city that is all about image and prestige and all of that for the last decade, I can see it. There appears to be like a shift in the culture where people are like thirsting for. That's not the right word, but they're yearning for more relatability, and people like they're always going to love the superstars and all of that. But there is an element of that that still seems manufactured, and I think that's why like you'll see like TikTok doing so well because it's like instead of everything being so manicured, like
Mhm.
people want to see people they can identify with in their real element that are being honest and authentic about what they're feeling and what they're going through. So yes, I think what you're saying is absolutely true.
Right. And then that ties in the story also because when you're looking at a story, you want a story that you can identify with one of the characters.
Hmm.
I mean, I can't really identify with Superman.
Right.
I mean, it'd be great to be able to do some of the things he does, but Clark Kent, clumsy, awkward with women. I mean, just a general awkward human being. I can relate to that every day.
Right. Right. Yeah. No. No. You're absolutely right. So let me ask you. Being somebody that is aware of like things that we deal with mental health, like how that affects dating. So like I'll start in the sense that yeah, I'm gonna try to figure out like so for me, I've had like I said in the last few years, I've had a lot of realizations. One we were talking about off camera. Anybody that knows me, you can probably know I have ADHD.
Hmm.
We used to always joke about it, but well, just my friends would joke about it. But another thing I've realized, just as of recent, probably just because of TikTok, is that I am almost certainly autistic, and it makes so many things make sense for me. Ooh, they might be upset that I say this because I haven't had this conversation with them, but I like me, my sisters and I have had the conversation that I think I'm pretty sure my mom probably had ADHD,
Hmm.
and they say typically autism comes from the father, and I that would make a lot of sense too.
Hmm.
I bring all that up just in unverified, they're just my thoughts.
Hmm.
Um, but it would make a lot of the dynamics in relationships between my parents and my parents with their children make more sense for me. But like I know for me, like relationships have always been a difficult thing for me. But it's one of those things, and I know you can identify with that. But for me, it's weird in the sense like it had to get to a point where I actually had to leave LA because I do feel like at least in my time, like dating here was difficult because I one of the issues I've always had with Omaha has been it's always a growing and burgeoning city, but up until recent, it still had a very small town mentality,
Hmm.
and that has been one thing. Which there's good and bad to it because I dated a young woman in LA that she grew up there, and her complaint is like LA didn't have a sense of community, which there clearly is here.
Hmm.
But for me, I think that was always an issue. But what I've also realized is to bring it back to dating and to family, for me, a lot of my issues stemmed from my relationships with my family. And I realized like that was almost like the epicenter of like a bomb, and everything else just kind of went from there. So like I'm still like I have trust issues with my immediate family, and not even like something terrible happened, but just what I think happened is like I became very self aware. Like I was aware at a much younger age, and I think part of that comes with neurodivergence. So like I was always really smart when I was young, and I would catch on to things, and I was always good at reading people. And I think a lot of
Hmm.
those things are things that come with being neurodivergent, like pattern recognition, being able to read when somebody's being authentic or not. And when
Hmm.
you're a kid, of course, your family is going to tell you whatever because they don't think you know what's going on. But also, there were legitimate issues. So for me, I always grew up with trust issues and relationship issues with my family, my immediate family. And, there's always an element to where that kind of plays into it's very common for certain people to feel like they are the black sheep. But going back to that, I had issues with my immediate family, which made it hard for me to connect with my extended family at events,
Hmm.
which kind of for me always felt like it drove a wedge between myself and them. That kind of went a little further to where like I had issues like dealing with like just interacting with people in the community,
Hmm.
which made me realize so you'll get to a point where like your relationships and your human interactions don't develop because of those issues.
Hmm.
So then you're like you're weird and you're an outcast and you're nerdy and you don't get along with people. My saving grace was, I think, between 7th and 8th grade. I learned this thing, which now I learned it was masking. I learned how to become cool. Like a certain point, like puberty hits you.
Mhm.
I started wearing a certain amount of like certain type of clothes. I started working out. I wanted to get the beard like LL Cool J, got the ears pierced, and then it was like a whole. It was like the movies were like overnight. I was this person that was cool and people like to
Mhm.
talk to. So I learned how to mask. I didn't know I was masking until recently, but like I'll refer to it as that I was masking, and I learned how to become cool and how to become accepted. So I was thrust into all of these situations and scenarios with people, whether it was friends or romantic situations. Like literally overnight, I went from like I never kissed a girl till I mean, and it's, everything for me started young. Never kissed a girl till sixth grade. Never. I had a girlfriend, but like I didn't talk to my girlfriend on the phone because I didn't know how to talk to people. And then all of a sudden, like I don't remember seventh grade, but by eighth grade, like I was one of the most popular people at the time. And this is sports and puberty comes into play. So like it was over. Not only was it something where all this attention comes overnight and you don't know how to deal with it, but also somebody like me, I didn't have the proper like um, aspects of like knowledge or comprehension on how to socialize with people,
Mhm.
just to socialize, let alone like. And we're still, I granted I get the scope, the concept of like all this stuff is like junior high going into high school, and we don't know anything, but I never had the basis of understanding like what love and relationships and trust and
Mhm.
communication are. So I already had a no foundation and then a very I didn't have a stable footing on how I even got started. So what I realized is like for me, it was one of those things to where like if your relationships with your family are the ones that inform everything, but the family they have their own issues and it's not on
Mhm.
stable ground, then that's going to influence things. And for me, it's like one thing I always remember from your book. I don't know if it was the manuscript or the book, but it's like you can't skip steps.
Yep.
And for me, like I realized that like I skipped a lot of steps and people just kind of let me do it because I looked older. I
Mhm.
presented myself as confident. So everybody always assumed this guy knew what he was doing. So that I got to just get away with a lot of stuff and just act like I knew what I was doing. But it made me
Mhm.
realize like now in hindsight, like I didn't know how to communicate with people. I didn't know how to properly love somebody, how to care for somebody, how to even know what I was feeling, how to deal with like frustration or jealousy or just normal like conflict resolution. Like
Mhm.
my parents would argue all the time. Like that, yeah, my parent, people, married couples argue. It's funny. Like my dad has a temper, my mom has a smart mouth. So
Mm.
you can imagine how that
Oh
goes.
yeah.
But as a kid, that was really like the youngest that was very sensitive, like that will ingrain a certain thing on you. So even to this day, like I'm very non-confrontational unless I'm very upset.
Mhm.
But also, if you have those same things where you have a temper and you don't know how to process emotions and frustration, that's going to come out some way. So I would be the type of person to where I would play super cool to where nothing would ever affect me,
Mhm.
but then one day it would all bubble up and then
Yep.
so all of that. So it's there's a lot more to it, but it having the knowledge of like knowledge itself is very important, but like having the knowledge of okay, I may be autistic and an autistic person processes things this way. We don't perceive things this way, and we have issues with this or that. It makes a lot of more things make sense, and it's one of those things to where like I can look back to my past and make it make sense for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I actually, um, I didn't mention this in the book, but I did have a conversation with my then wife where I said I think I'm autistic because when you think about just the difficulty with social interactions
Hmm.
and sometimes you find it hard to concentrate and things like that, and I just like I knew something was wrong, and one of the things that I've learned in through treatment and therapy is to be able to like name your pain.
I like that.
And I was watching Kobe's documentary, The Muse, at the gym the other day, and he was talking about how you have to be able to explain what's wrong with you while he was going through his Achilles rehab. And being able to explain, like, this is what's wrong is helpful. But when we were growing up, you know, we couldn't say, well, mom, it hurt me when you said this,
Mhm.
or dad, it hurt me when you said that,
Mhm.
because that was foreign to them because they didn't grow up being able to say, it
Absolutely.
hurt me when you did this, it hurt me when you did that. I mean, because we didn't know.
Right.
So when I look back on it, I look at, how we were brought up and the things that we didn't learn. I have more compassion for my parents because they were just working with the tools that they had.
Mhm. Mhm.
And like you said, there does need to be that conversation. And I'm glad that I'm being able to start to have that conversation with my parents, and being able to, through my, after the book came out, like they've, ever since then I've noticed them saying, mentioning more things about mental health. I
Mhm.
mean, and for me that's a win because
Absolutely.
now they'll be able to go back and see, okay, well, yeah, this would affect me, this would explain this would explain that. And I think senior mental health is, I mean, that's something that that's another topic that needs to be addressed as well. It is
It's
being
true.
addressed because our parents, our grandparents, they went through some stuff.
Right.
Believe me, they went through
Yeah,
some
no, no,
stuff.
yeah, they have, and that I think that also lends credence to how they deal with things because I think as every generation goes by, the edge is being taken off the traumas that have to be dealt with more and more. But that means the further back you go, the deeper, the sharper, and the more blunt the traumas were that they dealt with. And like you can, there's two things to that. So I'll go backwards. So there's also an element that we have to get past where like family traumas are like kept a secret and they're not talked about.
Hmm.
But it is because the further back you go, the darker and the more, for lack of a term, better term, the sinister the traumas that people went through were. And it's tough to, especially somebody that doesn't know, can't put into words. Well, they can put into words what happened, but how it affected them, and to understand that it's okay to talk about it. Like, why would they ever want to relive that? So it's
Right.
like it's one of those things where like you definitely, it would be wrong if people don't understand the concept of mental health. You really can't force them to talk about their traumas. But I had never thought, like, I'm glad you said something like even just the term senior mental health and how it should be a thing. Cause like I'll be honest, like my parents are in their 80s. It's almost like I want to have some of these conversations, and if I want to, it's gonna have to be soon. Because even if they're around for a while, like as they get older, like just the minds aren't the same. But I also at the same time, like they've lived through enough. Like I don't want to cause any
Hmm.
extra issues. But I will say, like one thing I do appreciate, because for so long, like I've had issues with both my parents, but I will say a lot of my issues have been with my father. But it took me going through a lot of like having never had any of these conversations with him. I will say another thing. I feel like I'm very empathic. Um,
Hmm.
Having enough of these like breakthroughs with myself, it made me realize that my dad isn't the villain. Where for decades he was the villain. I was like, oh,
Same.
he once again, if you are neurodivergent, specifically if you're autistic, you're a young black man, you were born in 39, 40s. I don't know a lot, but like I don't know a lot about him, but his dad probably wasn't the easiest man to deal with. I knew his mother, seemed like an amazing person, but she was tough.
Hmm.
And the times make it make sense. But to put myself in the mindset of who he might have been as a child, what he might have went through and never been able to deal with it, and how that expresses itself just as an adult, then let alone as a man with four kids,
Hmm.
and you and your wife are always getting into it. It's like, okay, I can understand that a little bit better now. It doesn't absolve everything, but at least it makes, just like you said, the villain, like he's not the villain, but if even if he was the villain, it helped to humanize him to then let me move him out of that villain territory in my mind.
Absolutely. And like when I think about me, I'll just say my two dads, like my biological father, who I found out was bipolar or is bipolar. I don't know where he is, or I want to find him. That's another project. And the man I call my father, who's technically my stepfather, but I call him my
Yeah, yeah,
father.
yeah.
Um, like you said, I spent a lot of my life characterizing him as the villain,
Mhm.
and when I really look back at it, and like when I started to um get older and be placed in the same situations that he might have been in, and really look at his life, I was just like, there might be a reason for some of the things that some of the ways that he was. And at this revelation, I was dealing with my youth and small group the other day. It's like, when I was growing up, it wasn't easy for me, but it also wasn't easy for him because I can imagine he felt rejection from myself and my sister. And
Mhm. Mhm.
um I just was thinking that throughout all of the rejection, I mean, and my mom, I mean, all couples argue and, they all couples get into it. I mean, hearing those things was traumatic. And, but I thought about the fact that in spite of all the rejection, in spite of all of the just like not feeling like appreciated,
Mhm.
he was still there.
Right.
I'm like, so there's more than one way to show love.
Absolutely.
And he was there. His method of showing love was providing. I mean, and maybe his love language was gifts.
Mhm.
I mean, and looking back on that now, I'm like, it makes so much more sense why, I mean, and how he was the way he was, because I mean, he may not have gotten a lot of gifts growing up.
Right.
He may have, I mean, wished that he could have done certain things and gone certain places, things like that. But I mean, as growing up was hard.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, I can understand him much better now, and I have a greater appreciation.
Mhm.
So, yeah, he was the villain, but I mean, I mean, he was a kid at one point, just like me.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it definitely makes you wonder. It's good to it sucks that we don't gain this understanding until we're older.
Hmm.
And it seems like it always happens around right around the same time you get into your late 30s, your 40s, you start to see stuff from a different perspective, or you have kids and you're in that same position, then it makes more sense earlier. But it does suck that we don't get to this point until, especially your parents are a lot older that you understand it. But
Hmm.
also I think there's a element of just as more knowledge and information gets out there, it speeds up the time and the process that the information is
Yep.
disseminated to where people can understand these things, which is why, some putting your story out there or telling a documentary or creating a documentary about it, I think is important. Because, yeah, it's one of those things where, like, you realize another aspect that is prevalent that isn't talked about is like depression, and how, of course, everybody understands depression, but like how many factors that, especially when you start talking about like within black culture and for us specifically black men, like how many elements of different things contribute to like poor mental health,
Hmm.
and just how much, just in, I guess, in general, how much people are carrying around, like they say you never know what somebody's going through. So just how much people are going through on a daily basis and how much people hide it. And I do, Bruce was, that going back to that quote, like I do. It's funny because as soon as I realized I wanted to do this documentary, I started almost, I'd say, doing like opposition research, like, because if you're going to tell a story, you have to be able to tell the counter story or the counter argument to it. So
Hmm.
um, there's an element to where you want to be able to be empathetic and talk about feelings and emotions, but you also understand that there is some truth to the fact that easy times make weak men. So it's just one of those things where we need to create a, and this is a tangent, but I'll get back to it. Like my personal, I guess what I'm saying, my personal conflict that I have now in this documentary is, how am I going to tell this story about creating that space for people to be vulnerable and transparent while still realizing that we live in a world where we have to be strong, and we
Hmm.
have to have that strength, and we have to be able to put that away at times to be leaders, to be protectors, to be providers. But with that being said, I do think there is a space where everybody has mental health issues.
Hmm.
more often than not, everybody has some type of mental health and their mental health issue, and they're going through depression, if not worse. I know those are some of the things that you talked about in your book. And I know those are things that I've had to deal with when you start talking about depression and there's like suicidal ideation and all of that stuff. So yeah, there's definitely, I think, and you can dive into that more, but there's a larger conversation that needs to be had about that as well.
There is, and with depression, when I'm a volunteer with NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they say 1 in 5 adults will deal with a mental health condition,
Hmm.
and I just is dealing with a mental health condition, and I say those are just the ones that are diagnosed
Right, right.
because not everyone is going to seek out treatment,
Hmm.
not everyone is going to get screened, and because there's still a
Some are
stigma.
going to hide it, some are going to deny it. You
Yeah,
know.
some are gonna hide it, some are gonna deny it, some are gonna try to self-medicate.
Yep.
So there's definitely a larger conversation to be had. And as far as suicidal ideations, one of the things that I've learned is that for some people, like this is gonna sound this might I don't want to trigger anyone, but some people's like for some people to have thoughts of suicide or the thought, I don't want to be here, that might not be that abnormal for them.
No.
I mean, the issue comes in when you start, do you have a plan? Do you have, an idea of how you want to do it and things like that? But the reality is sometimes it's a thought that a lot of us have
Hmm.
that don't admit it. And what I say is, if you haven't thought about quitting something like a job or a relationship or something like that, how much have you really put in?
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, no, no. That's I haven't thought about that. That's true. There's there's a couple things to that. Like I definitely agree. Like it's much more commonplace. I seen this thing, and I have a friend that's kind of in politics, and I sent them this TikTok video, and it was based around politics, but it's more just about the climate. But it does tie into this in a way. Um, the guy came in, and it basically is his the title of the video is "Death is Now an Option." So like we have a whole generation of people that just feel based on like the world, the economy, politics,
Hmm.
all of that, they feel like they are so disenfranchised and they've been so like manipulated or they don't buy into the scare tactics of, oh, if you vote for this person, this is going to happen that would have worked generations before. And they just see no prospects of just a happy life. This guy is saying like death is now an option, and people are like, it falls along the same group of people that you see are just really ready to see the world burn. But I think that is a a symptom of the same thing where there clearly is something that's going on, whether it's just untreated trauma
Hmm.
or a disconnect between like what's going on in the world and what is like actually being spoken to and what is actually what people are working to rectify. But just people just you can tell that with the way the economy is going and take away people's personal mental health and whatever they're dealing with internally, you see a growing number of people that have gotten past just being depressed, but they really are like, hey, I will check myself off of this planet. And I
Hmm.
think that is a larger that's a symptom of a much larger thing that shows that mental health really is an issue that we need to address.
Yeah. And when people start thinking like not wanting to be on this planet, they've lost hope.
Mhm.
One of the principles of support, when I facilitate a support group on Tuesday nights for NAMI, our last principle of support is we will never give up hope.
Mm.
When there's so many people that have given up hope because of the things that they see. With the news, with social media,
Yeah.
just everything that they see, it detracts from their hope. So it's like, maybe getting out of here isn't the best. Maybe getting out of here is a good idea. And one of the things that we have to challenge that with is that, you know, this moment that we're in our lives, like whatever moment that you find yourself in,
Mhm.
is temporary.
Right.
It's just a moment. I mean, there's still so much more out there. I mean, so you might be hurting right now, but I mean, give it a bit. Just hang in there, keep showing up. I mean, I might be talking to myself just as much as
Yeah.
anybody else right now. Just keep grinding. And I mean, things might change. I mean, just make one little change, just make one little adjustment, and it can make a world of difference. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much toxicity. Just
Even I would say I agree, but beyond that, like having spent the past decade plus in a town like LA and just having, witnessed the growth of social media, and this goes back to, you being able to connect with people. There's two things that I think that are happening outside of like people's personal like mental health and traumatic issues. One, in the last 10 years with the growth of like social media, I feel like the rise, and this is going back to The Rock, I think, but just not trying to put him, but he's an example. The rise of like the pristine, manicured, like online image.
mhm,
And on the other end, like the way that life is just becoming more difficult. Like, well, there's inflation and
mhm,
cause and um I can't think of the word, but like wages not like matching that.
mhm,
Just the general quality of life of the world and just all this conflict. But between people feeling like, especially these kids, feeling like they need to hold themselves to a higher standard,
mhm,
but it becoming even more difficult to reach that based on where they're starting out in life, it makes the image of happiness seem even less attainable.
mhm,
And whereas, like you said, if you can just adjust a couple things, or maybe just, uh, look within and find that happiness within. And there's a lot of different things. I don't want to go through the whole list, but there are ways to find happiness, and happiness truly comes from within. But nobody of influence or affluence is really teaching them that. So nobody really sees those things. This is a separate conversation from like the traumas that are passed down from family. But if everywhere you look, from being an adolescent to like your 20s, it's like, hey, I need to keep up with this. I need to look like this. I need to date this person. I need to have this thing. If I don't project myself a certain way, I am lesser than, I'm not
mhm,
worthy. There has to be, I mean, there is, but there has to be like a enough. We know there's an effect, but I don't think we can even comprehend the fact that it's having on adult psyches, let alone people in their 20s or in their teens or even younger. So I think that's a whole nother aspect of it that we see kind of being spoken around about with some of these things. Like I know there was a Facebook leak, somebody from Facebook leaked a report speaking to stuff like that. But I think that's another element,
mhm,
and that's only adding to the problem. And I know being in LA, I have this love hate relationship with social media because like I know the game. And another story, how I present myself, like I look like I subconsciously like, it's funny, like in a sense, like my external hasn't caught up with my internal. Like internally,
mhm,
like I don't want to be around anybody. Like not in the bad way,
mhm,
like I deal with the same people. I'm an introvert. Like I don't want to be approached, but I have been programmed externally to look a certain way
mhm,
to give off this look, which is cool. Like I'm not like doing anything crazy. I just did hair and clothes. Um, but that is part of like the effect of social media. And I feel like a lot of us creatives, like we're going to be unique. So I'm not saying I'm doing this for the wrong reasons, but it's not lost on me that, hey, you can benefit just from projecting yourself and looking a certain way.
mhm,
But if what you're like, at least I've caught it, and I guess what I'm saying is like for me, at least I'm aware of what I'm doing,
mhm,
and I'm not letting it affect my worth. Like I just still choose to dress this way. But a lot of days, if you see me, I look like I'm in all black sweats. I just look like some regular dude, or I might look like a bum. But certain days, like, okay, I'm on
mhm,
camera, I'm gonna do this. But I say that to say, like, at least I'm aware of it, and I'm a full middle-aged man at this point. But if you are in high school or in your junior high or even in college, and you are really led to believe that a lot of your value and your worth comes from looking like somebody you saw on TV or somebody you saw on the internet. And if you aren't able to live up to that standard, or even worse, you don't even have the means to try to attempt to live up to that standard, that's going to knock your self-confidence in the least, if not worse.
Man, you just dropped a bar right there because it's almost like the conversation we're having right now is just really what has been going through my head lately,
Hmm.
and it's going into book two, s- tentatively titled "Who Could Love This Mess." I've been at church. When I go to church, it's like people was like noticing them like always wear like Jordan or Nike or something like that, and a couple nobody was mentioning it maliciously or anything like that, but they just mentioned it, and I was meditating. I was like, why do I do that?
Hmm.
And I thought back to, like when I was back in middle school, my parents wouldn't buy me J's.
Right.
Would not. Probably could have, but well,
Yeah.
maybe they could have. I don't know. They
Right.
didn't for whatever reason. I appreciate them more now.
Hmm.
But I was like, why am I doing that? And it comes back to like that was my idea of what looked good. You know, I mean, be like Mike. I mean, he's still one of my heroes. I mean, be like Mike. The hair thing is just coincidental because I mean I'm old,
Right.
but I mean, you see him, he's pristine. He was always in a suit, or he's wearing his name.
Right.
And I was like, why am I doing that? And it comes back to this shirt. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a baller. It's like, I really don't like myself that much.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Absolutely.
And I was just like, so I want to present myself like, if you look at me, you see the Jordan gear, you see stuff like that. I'm hiding from you.
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
hiding me from you so that you can see, oh, he's got on the fresh J's, he got the Jordan outfit. I mean, he looks like he could be a Jordan brand model, stuff like that. I would like a job, but I mean,
Right.
but the thing is, it's like I don't want you to see me. You can
Hmm.
see my shoes, you can see my clothes, but I don't want you to see me because I'm a mess.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Like I something else. I do a lot of like online content. Like I was doing like YouTube, like filmmaking stuff, and I'm trying to figure out how to like pivot because like I feel like I have so much more to offer. And like I said, when I'm thinking about doing documentaries, I'm doing this podcast, so I write a lot of this stuff out, and a lot of what I've been writing is going back to what I was saying about like that time, how stuff changed in high school, and then I what I was inadvertently doing was masking because I don't know whether I liked myself or not, but I knew being myself wasn't working to get me the results that I wanted. So I successfully became this different person. But what happened is I think now I'm still trying to figure it out, but I know I had my first real bout of depression in my sophomore year in high school. And I tried to get myself out of here then, but I know separately, and what I was really going towards is as soon as I got out of high school, um, like it was like a drop off in the sense of like I just couldn't connect with people the way I used to. And I think what happened is like I went through burnout because I had so many years of masking and not being my
Hmm.
authentic self that like I literally just I had no desire to, but even if I wanted to, I couldn't hold up that facade anymore. And I think once that happened, it made things really, really difficult for me. And it was almost like the veil was like it was lifted or fell from my eyes. And it was like I got to see the world for what it really was. Especially when like it felt like I lost a superpower. And it's like
Hmm.
and when I lost the superpower, it also all the people I liked to be around before, like I didn't feel the same about them. And I realized that is one of those things that happened is like I was when I couldn't mask anymore, I was forced to see who my authentic self was and to deal with everything from the view of my authentic self because it's like okay if I was in person in character as this other person, okay, I could hang out with this person, I could have this conversation, I could carry myself a certain way. But once I lost that ability, like all the desires and the way of like conducting myself, like I lost the ability to do that and I lost the desire for it, but I was already moving in a certain direction. So then I had to kind of course correct,
Hmm.
and that put me at odds with a lot of people because it's like hey, why did this person change up? And it was one of those things where like it wasn't even like it's different if you change up and you change up by choice, but if you change up because you Funny thing, and this ties into it. I will never forget this. There's a young lady I used to do video content for, and she met Bruce Jenner when Bruce Jenner was still Bruce Jenner,
Mhm,
and he had told her, this is probably about the same time. This is like 2010 ish. He was like, when you see, this is maybe when Kim and Kanye first started dating or somewhere around then, but he was like, when you see my kids or these people on TV and they say they've lost their mind, like he uses, for example, of Britney Spears, it's like they didn't lose their mind. That's them actually being them for the first time instead
mhm,
of being this thing. So I'm glad I actually heard that because it made it make sense for me. But this was all happening around that same time, and it made me real like it threw me for a loop, and I didn't realize it till later because it's like it's almost when nothing tastes the same. All the like if you just lose a taste for all your favorite foods, like
mhm,
all the stuff that I was doing in life, all the places that I wanted to go, it was like, oh, I wanted to be around these people, to be seen a certain way. I wanted to be part of the cool crowd. Like all of that just overnight just vanished. And I'm like, well, damn, who am I now? Like, what am I going to do now? Like, luckily enough, all the things I actually wanted to do, like all of this stuff was still like, it was always there. But everything else outside of that, like I had to kind of alter my life overnight. And that was a tough thing to do. But it all stemmed from, for me, it may not. I don't even no. Actually, no. I'm sure in junior high, I can remember actually in seventh grade, like really hating myself. Like so yes, it stems from the same thing. But then not only that, but then finding a version of myself that actually worked, which can be even more dangerous.
mhm,
Which I will say it helps. Which is why I'm glad. One, I pursue being behind the camera, and then two, lets it make sense to me why you see people in Hollywood like go crazy from time to time. I mean, because there could be so many different or go crazy, but there could be so many different reasons. But like, it makes sense because at some point there's only so long that you can be your inauthentic self
mhm,
because at some point that's gonna fall. That facade is gonna fall away. Um, and especially if you are doing it because sometimes like if you have a job you have to put on a bit of a character to go to job in the corporate
mhm,
world. So I think sometimes there is a difference when like you know what you're doing and you're doing it like in moderation, not like being fake but like, huh, okay, I have to be my corporate self at work, but like when
mhm,
you are projecting a whole separate persona that is inauthentic from who you are,
mhm,
and more importantly you're doing it for the wrong reasons, um, then you're going to end up in problems. Like I'll give you another example. Like for me, I realized all the times I tried to get in shape up until recently, up until the pandemic, I was always doing it from a place of I hate my body. Like I'm gonna punish
mhm,
myself to try to work out to get in shape, and it would never work. It would never stick because if you're doing it from a place of hate, like it's just not healthy. It's not sustainable. And if it is
mhm,
sustainable, like you're going to be worse off in the end. At some point, you have to do whatever you're doing, but especially if you want to get healthier or to be in better shape, do it from a place of love. Like, oh, I love myself, so I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to work to do this to take care. I'm going to work to take care of myself so I can be around longer to
mhm.
treat myself or for the ones that I love. So like I think that same mindset can apply to like how we present ourselves. If you're presenting yourself as something that's not you, sometimes you may have to do that. I hope to not do that as I hope to do that as little as possible. But specifically, if you're doing that because you hate yourself or you don't think you're good enough, like that's going to lead to problems at some.
It does lead to problems, and it leads you to a place where once you get tired of it, I mean, where you get tired will be because it wears on you when you're just trying you're out here pretending and just faking. And I mean, at some point, I mean, like they say, when you if you tell one lie, you have to tell another lie to cover up for that lie. It's just like it gets old. And what you said about all of a sudden the foods don't taste the same and things like that. It makes a lot of sense because at some point you have to ask yourself, I mean, it comes back to the why. Like you
Hmm.
said, why am I working out? I've even asked myself that question lately. Why am I working out? And I'm working out because I do want to be around longer. There was a time when I was working out because I felt like I have to look a certain way. If I look a certain way, if I act a certain way, if I present myself a certain way, then I'll get quote unquote her.
Hmm.
But then I was asking myself, like, what do I even have to offer?
That's huge.
And the answer to that question I came to was nothing. Because if I don't like myself, why would anybody else want to be around
Yeah.
me? So I was like, that was a tough like meditation. It's like, wow.
And even to go even further, like how not only how can you love someone if you can't love yourself, but you're only capable of loving somebody to the level that you love yourself. So
Right.
if you find the right person, you find the perfect person, and God brings her to you, and you can't love her right, that will probably hurt worse when she leaves based off of that.
Man, I tell you, when I came to that realization, I seriously wanted to like reach out to every ex, every jump off, we'll call them, every my ex-wife, I mean, women I've pursued that rejected me, women I've been with that we broke up. I almost wanted to call them all and say, you were right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, if they ever see this, you were right because yeah, if you got rid of me or rejected me, you did the right thing because I wasn't, and I'm probably still not in the right space.
Right.
I'm getting there, but you were right.
Yeah, no, that and it sucks because you can't see it. Like I don't know if I mentioned this or if I said it earlier, but there's a what I realized, and this was pre-pandemic, and this is probably when I first realized I needed to do that like inner work. Like it's different. Like I said, there's a mindset and there's an overarching kind of mentality here, especially at that time. So if I kept running into like a lot of the same issues in relationships here, that's one thing because a lot of people were the same. Everybody's in everybody's business. So there's a similar like group think, like you have to be this
Mhm.
way. So I could chalk it up to that. Once I got into LA and I had a real relationship and I was like, okay, I'm coming to some of these same problems. Like she don't have the same mindset as these people here. So
Mhm.
that means the problem is me.
You know, Taylor Swift, I mean, I got to give her props. She has
No,
a
that's
song
the problem. Yeah.
she has a song Anti-Hero,
Mm-hmm.
and one
Mm-hmm.
of my pastors at Hope Church, shout out to Jason Davis, he did a sermon on that song.
Mm-hmm.
If you listen to the lyrics of that song, it says, "It's me, hi, I'm
I'm
the
the
problem,
problem.
it's
It's me.
me."
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh my gosh." I mean, she was preaching because I mean, I looked at every relationship I've been in, and they were all, it's like they all kind of were saying the same things about me. I was like, why didn't I see this sooner? Like you were talking about the veil coming off your eyes. It's like, it's kind of like the man in the Bible where the scales came off his eyes. It's like, now I'm seeing this, and I'm like, this has been here all along,
Hmm.
and I couldn't see it.
And there's also, I'd be curious if you have this thing. Like I've realized, um, I don't put too much on them, but growing up, everything we're products of our environment. So for me, I say this without getting myself in trouble. It's like I grew up around both sides of my family, all women. So
Hmm.
I always grew up around very strong. I'll get in trouble for using the word, but I'm talking about my family, so I would say some combative women, you know. So, and also, I don't say combative, well, it's very strong vocal women. I'll put it like that. And with parents that I didn't see a lot of consistent affection between, but a lot of bickering between. So for me, I knew, even though I knew I didn't want those things, it still subconsciously informed my mind on like, hey, this is within the scope of what a normal relationship looks like.
Hmm.
Not enough on the like the romantic loving end, but enough on like, hey, you're gonna bicker and do this and that, and you're gonna accept some things from women that you maybe shouldn't. So, and also for whatever reason, may be a people don't like the term, but you could have at a time been a broken person. And I do think that like broken people or hurt people can identify other broken and hurt people. So I will say there's an aspect of that where I had to realize that that's another pattern that I was creating for myself. And like who I was avoiding and who I was going towards, and the patterns, the common patterns and themes in a lot of my relationships. And that comes from, how we're programmed, that passed down trauma, being a product of our times and our environment and all of that. But that is another aspect where, yes, we have been the problem, but also you can't just stop there. You have to figure out why you were the problem, how you were the
Yes.
problem, and where that problem emanated
Mhm.
from, so then you can then fix that to become better if you want to actually have something.
Exactly. And I mean, okay, so if I say who can love this mess, I have to figure out, okay, why exactly am I a mess?
Hmm.
Because I wasn't, I mean, I didn't set out to be a mess.
Hmm.
I mean, but why? I mean, why am I drawn to, I mean, why can we identify other hurt people?
Right.
I mean, why am I drawn to, I mean, when I think about it, maybe you've experienced this too. Um, for me, I tend to gravitate more towards like people who reject me
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
me that seems normal as opposed to if someone tries to actually show me love and affection and things like and that causes me to like freeze.
Yeah. No, I, I know I gravitate towards unavailable women.
Mhm.
I used to when I was younger, I would like chalk it up to being like, oh, this is part of the challenge. But
Mhm.
also, if you grew up around, like it's just they say nature versus nurture. For me, if I grew up around women who for whatever reason were not emotionally available or created distance, that once again that becomes a norm, that becomes a pattern. So you innately know how to deal with these things.
Mhm.
Whereas if, somebody is coming, bringing probably the energy you should want, but it's an unknown quantity, you don't, it's outside of your comfort zone. So you may avoid it.
Yeah, cuz you don't know how to deal with that
Yep.
and you fear it and I mean,
And I don't think what I'm gonna say applies to you, but I will say for like a lot of my friends, we're too cool. She's too into, not she's too into me, but it'd be like, oh, she's on me, like, oh, this is and that. I don't want it. When she may have just had a heart full of love and was just looking for somebody to give it to. But because it was packaged in a certain way, the male ego, especially when you're younger, combined with the pattern of what you're used to, put you in a situation to where you will avoid what is probably good for you and seek out what isn't healthy for you.
oh well, yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, I totally identify with that because I've had women pursue me that, you know, wanted to love me, wanted to give me affection, wanted to, you know, be there for me.
Hmm.
I couldn't get with that.
Yeah.
But this woman who would maybe didn't want me or wasn't emotionally available, I mean, I was like going after that felt like my lane.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, I can totally relate to that.
Remember, and it's so funny. Like I've only had one woman put it so clearly to me, but she was like, she's talking about me. She's like, you only want a person. She's like, you only want a person to come this close, but you don't want them to go all the way away. And it's like as soon as somebody moves in or outside of that range, like then I will act. And I was like, nah. But like whether I fully agree with it, I can 1000% see where they're coming from, because it's one of those things where like if you, whether it's true or not, if you don't ever feel like you've like felt that love,
Mhm.
then you don't even know that somebody coming closer than this barrier is normal.
Mhm.
And not only that, but it is probably a fearful thing, but also you don't maybe want to be fully alone. So you don't always push people past a certain point. But for me, I was like, oh, that does make sense, because for me, if I don't know those things, like I don't know what something this close feels like,
Mhm.
then why would I let it in? But also, I'm still human, so I want connection. So I'm going to want somebody around. But yeah, it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, they had a valid point.
And here's this other piece of it. What if somebody getting this close, like say your family,
Hmm.
what if those people who got that close hurt
Hurt you,
you.
let you down, all that. Yeah, absolutely.
Eh,
And
eh,
that's another yeah.
so I mean, letting people get that close and they've hurt you,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
gonna
no.
push it back.
1,000 yeah, that is a huge part of it. It's funny, like, for me, and I know it's not healthy, but I also would argue it's not the least healthy thing. Like, I have the pandemic was life-changing for me in so many ways, good and
Mhm,
bad, but mostly good, but it allowed me to, like I had a homeboy, he's a little older than me in LA, tell me, like, I'm hyper dependent. I 1,000% am, but, like, the pandemic made me realize, like, I don't know how this is gonna come across, but it's the truth. Like, dying alone ain't the worst thing to me.
mhm,
Like, I still am open to being with somebody, but I say that in regards to being with the wrong person. Like,
mhm,
the worst thing I've ever felt for me is like being with somebody and still feeling alone,
mhm,
but then also being knowing that I'm neurodivergent and just being like, well, I think when you're neurodivergent, you're very particular. You're not picky, but you're particular just about anything. Like your comfort zone, what you want to eat, what you want to do,
mhm,
the audio levels in social environments, so many different things. And if you don't know that you're that, then it's hard to communicate those things. But then even if you know that you are, finding somebody that can understand those things and still being somebody that can check the boxes for the other person.
mhm.
So I think if and when I get back to dating, having a greater knowledge of self will help that. But in the meantime, I have never had more peace in my life since I've had in the pandemic and afterwards. So for me, it's like, damn, like I know I should like I ain't getting no younger, so I should be out there dating, but also like I don't know, life's peaceful right now. So I mean, eventually, and once again, like I will say, like God is still working on me because like every now and then he'll bring somebody along that is like, okay, I could see myself with this person, but they're also not the person based on circumstances.
Mhm.
So I think he does that enough just to show me that hey, okay, there still could be somebody out there, but you being me, I would hope he's also saying you're on the right path by doing the inner work, as you said. Like I gotta be that person for the right person too. So I think it's definitely a whole little journey.
Yeah, I mean, and the pandemic did do a lot of things, and it's like when you talk about that inner peace, and I mean, being with the wrong person, and you know, not being able to be your authentic self. I mean, I'll take being alone, being single over that any day because having been in relationships where I couldn't be me, where I had to like, pretend to be somebody that I'm not,
Right.
that was hell. I was talking about just the fact of being with someone and being with the wrong person just for the sake of having
Oh,
somebody there.
okay. So I realized, like, for me, like, one of my neurodivergent things is authenticity
Mhm.
in the sense that, and I think I was saying it stemmed from that stint I had when I was masking for so long that, like, I can't, I, if I have to be somewhere or if I have to be inauthentic, this holds me back in business a lot in two ways. Like, if I go into a room and I know somebody's being fake, I can't let I can't let you in. Like even if it's business, even if you're trying to do business with me, I can't really like
Mhm.
interact with you the way that I should. And I also can't fake it because like for me, like it's a respect thing. Like if I genuinely respect you, I want to be my authentic self. And then if I know I can't be, then
Mhm.
like I'll just be very surface level, even though I hate surface level. And if somebody is being authentic, like I don't trust them, which probably goes back to like early childhood, all that stuff. So for me, I realized that authenticity is so important. Another thing I learned about neurodivergence, we have a great sense of like, we have a heightened sense of justice, like wrong and right.
Mhm.
So for me, it's like if it goes those two that combo is is a terrible combo for me at times. It's like because you deserve to get my authentic self and I deserve to get your authentic self. So for me, a lot of times, like when I can't be authentic, like end up holding myself back in so many situations.
Mhm.
And I think for me that ties into um it ties into dating too. I mean, I get it. Like in when you're dating, you kind of have you should put your best foot forward.
Mhm.
Um, in a sense, and I think that's good, but we also live in a time based on like how we said stuff with social media, like where people are truly just showing up as somebody else
Mhm.
for whatever intentions, even if it's like, hey, they're programmed like this is how you get somebody. You show up as this person and then you show them your authentic self later.
Mhm.
That is more commonplace, but I realize for me, like it the need for authenticity, which I think is a good thing at its source, I definitely let it hinder me a lot of times, and especially even in dating.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I don't I don't know if I would call it a hindrance so much as just knowing they tell you to know what you want.
Hmm.
And if you know that you need to be authentic, you need to be that because you've experienced the other side of that,
Hmm.
it not being authentic. So if not being authentic, I mean, quite frankly, not being authentic almost killed me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm gonna be as authentic as hell.
Right. I think for me, it's a and it's I think it's all happening for a reason, but it's a unique situation because I would say I'm blessed enough to have some people that root for me, and they root for me sometimes by putting me in positions in rooms with people and opportunities. And in those instances, it's like they are used to conducting themselves and presenting themselves a certain way, so they need me to do it. And that's when it's really tough. It's like, okay, if you introduce me to somebody, it's like now your name's on the line. So like I'm gonna do whatever I can do to show up for you, but then
Hmm.
that's gonna conflict with my need to be authentic. And
Yeah.
that's just a whole little issue that I run into all the time now. So it's just something I'm just working through in in real time. And but I've realized that, and it also makes it make sense. Um, I have that issue with dating too, in the sense of like, so in that same instance, and I'm so stupid. Like men, we're stupid at times. I have this thing where like I'm great at pattern recognition. If somebody ever tries to hide something from me, I'll figure it out. But if you do something right in front of my face, I'll miss it because I'm just
Hmm.
stupid like that. But to tie that together, like if always if a young lady likes you at some point she's going to introduce you to all her friends or whoever. You just got to that time where you got to meet everybody.
Hmm.
That's the worst time in the world for me because like now like I also the conflict for me as much as I dress this way, like I don't like to be the center of attention. Like I want to be in the background.
Hmm.
So anytime I go somewhere and all eyes are on me, it is the most uncomfortable thing ever. But when it's those scenarios, I've learned looking back when like, okay, this person really likes you and now they want to introduce you to somebody. And now I have to go and like I can understand it now. And I haven't been in that situation for years, but I remember last time I was in that situation was years ago and it was LA, so it was a big event. But I realized like, oh, okay, this is a common thing. Every time I go in these situations and I got to show up for somebody else, it never goes well, and that's that need for authenticity. But at least, like I said, now I under with the knowledge of self and understanding what
Hmm.
the problem is and where the conflict is like, okay, I can work through that. But I can look back and see that clear pattern of every time somebody, even in a good sense, somebody's like spoken highly of me and now I need to go show up in a group of people up
Hmm.
until like just really, really recently. Oh, I've, for lack of a term, I've shit the bed every time.
Yeah. Man, it's amazing. If we'd have known all this when we was younger, we'd have been dangerous.
Yeah, but I feel like you get it when you're supposed to. Like, it's a funny thing. So I have two close homeboys in LA, and all everyone's damn near all my friends. You and I may be the last ones. They are either are or have been married and or with kids. But my one of my boys in LA, like it's gonna give too much info to put him out there, but it's married and he has kids. And I'm single. And like I used to always be on the dating apps and I just send him pictures of girls like I matched with. And he'd be like, boy, you lucky, because if he was single in my shoes, he would do this or that. But I've realized like the irony is I can be single and match with all these women, but like he said basically said God knows who to give what to. Cause
Hmm.
like I'm not gonna take advantage of most of this stuff just because like I'm just in my own world, just being this and not say antisocial, this introverted, weird
Hmm.
person. Um, but it does give more context now. So when I do start dating again, having that knowledge, I would assume it will help me if that time comes. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another thing, being honest, if that time comes, I mean, because that's part of the facade. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to date. You're supposed to be in a relationship with somebody. I mean, And if you feel like, and if you're not, you feel less than. I'm like, you know what? You have to. A older gentleman told me at one point to embrace my singleness,
Oh yeah,
and I told, and that my first thought was, why would I embrace something that I don't want? But now I can
it's
understand. It's like
perspective.
he was just telling me to enjoy it, may
Yeah,
experience it, because there might come a time if you do get into a relationship, you can't do everything. There's gonna be
yeah,
some, you might be not be able to do it. So just enjoy it and be where you are, because I mean, like when you the desire for things to be different from what they are is what causes suffering.
absolutely. I've that's one thing. Like I'm at peace with where I'm at dating wise, in a sense of like I'm cool if I'm going to be alone. I also know I'm old enough that at any time the next relationship could be my last relationship, so I could literally go from just being alone to just being with one person forever. And that don't
Hmm.
sound like the greatest to me either. But I also know I'm not gonna go out there and just start dating a bunch of women. So
Yeah.
but also like I realize like that having that knowledge of self helps better inform the type of person I would want to be with if
Hmm.
and when the time comes. So that is a good thing. But yeah, that's a whole and dating in LA is expensive. So
Oh, whew.
yeah,
I
I
could
ain't got it.
I could about imagine. Like Biggie said, great place to visit. So, like when we think about mental health and black men mental health, and we think about the church, like for us growing up in the church, I mean, here in Omaha, like, I mean, we happen to be here, and thinking about like the men I saw growing up in church. I mean, like the men looked up to, dressed pristine, dressed to the nines. And I mean, growing up in the church was, it had its, I mean, it had its advantages, but also growing up in the church, it didn't really. It was another place where you really couldn't, in some ways, you really couldn't be yourself,
Hmm.
because you had to put on that church face
Hmm.
and that church speak.
Yeah, no, I keep going, keep going. I know where I'm going on this. I'm listening.
Yeah, that church speak. So you were, and then when you add, I mean, it seems when you add the girls to the mix at church.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no. So, like, when you say that, what it makes me think of is, and it makes literally like knowledge itself is so important. Like, the knowledge that I'm gaining about myself makes everything make so much sense. Um, because everything I realize now, most of the issues I've had, at least since teens on with church, comes back to pattern recognition and authenticity.
Hmm.
For somebody to who I'm glad I said that before, um, to who like authenticity and like, because I do think like neurodivergence, we're very good at reading people.
Hmm.
Um, so when I see people that I know are and you want to give grace to say there's an element everybody's a sinner, everybody's working through things, but separate than that, like when you see people who you know are working, not working, who people are not accurately representing themselves in the sense of like, hey, this is who I am on Sunday, but I'm clearly a totally different person on the regular outside of there. Like for me, that that kind of has always kind of soiled or sullied like my outlook on the church. And then it definitely has affected a lot of things for me, and it's weird because and I actually like I know somebody that is a preacher that I may have come on here. Conversely, I met this guy at UCLA. He is a cognitive neuroscience major. He grew up, his family's like devout Muslim. He
Mm.
grew up with that, but like at this point, he's complete atheist. So like I would love to have him on for different reasons, just to have different conversations. Because I do think so. Funny enough, I think the next 5 years of my life could be dedicated to something like this documentary. But I always felt like when I got older, I was gonna like study religion because just the religion is just so interesting to
Mhm.
me. Um, from the aspects of like how it's been used to, I mean, I'm trying not to get too conspiratorial on all this, but like how it's been used to manipulate people, like the commonalities in
That's not conspiratorial,
well, no,
that's
no,
facts.
not that part, but when you start seeing the commonality in the story of the Messiah in so many different religions and
Mhm,
religions that predate Christianity, and
mhm,
you start talking about how the apocrypha and stuff that was taken out of the book, out of the Bible,
mhm,
the Ethiopian Bible from like the 1600s. Then you start looking at like just historically how many things have been, how much of history has been changed, how much of it's been whitewashed.
mhm,
Literally, I was just, I just saw how, in Russia they just opened the vaults, and now we're seeing that, all the depictions from that time of Christ were they look like us, which the Bible already said, but like
mhm.
there's just so many things there. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not at a loss for reasons to distrust and to question a lot of things when it comes to religion, the church, and sometimes the Bible.
Yeah,
So yeah, growing up, and then you put that other aspect to it to where, whatever your relationship, most of our relationship with the church starts from the home, and if the relationship in the home is off, then that's going to affect that
yeah,
too.
and, like, I mean, you got a preacher on here now, technically.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. This is true. This is true.
But, um, the thing is, like, when you see, like, those people not being authentic and not representing, I mean, it goes back to that sense of justice. It's like, that ain't right. And when you have that desire for authenticity, you seek that out. So, I mean, I can understand having some issues with the church as we grew up in it because there was so much pretending. And if we weren't careful, well, I mean, I got caught up in it. I fell into that trap. I mean, I got ordained when I was like 25, and because I was trying to please those people,
Hmm.
please family, I mean, and kind of climb that church ladder, so to speak. Because, like, if they see me as this preacher, which I'm not doubting that I don't have a calling to ministry, but my perspective on what ministry actually is now,
Hmm.
as opposed to 20 plus years ago, is way different.
Right.
And I fell into that trap, but at a certain point, I began to really like do what the Bible says and study for myself. And what you mentioned is like really diving into it. And I began to see that a lot of what I was doing, I didn't believe necessarily.
Hmm.
Like, they say, don't drink or don't do this, don't do that. And I'm like, well, it doesn't actually say don't drink. It says for certain people not to drink.
Right.
And so I was like, wait a minute. Then I started asking other questions. It gets dangerous when you start asking the why questions. Like,
Yeah.
why do we, why are we here all day? It may seem like a small thing, but it goes back to the fact that back in the day in the quote unquote black church, Sunday, you went to church, you might have a potluck dinner afterwards, and then you would have church again. Because in large part, that was an escape from
The
the
outside world.
traumas of your life as as a black person, the hardships. So you would throw yourself into praise or worship and have these emotional outbursts because that felt like your safe space. And
Hmm.
who doesn't want to stay in their safe space for as long as possible?
No, no, I get it. And even as I was finishing up speaking and you start speaking, like I realized like there's another element that comes with time and information. You realize, even if part of me says like that pure hearted child in me says, hey, this is about authenticity. I do also understand as an adult this is also a place of business and they have to keep the lights on and they have to pay the bills.
Mhm.
So there's a certain element of like, there's, if you put yourself, which I would say put myself in their shoes, but you've been next to the shoes, if not in those shoes, where, hey, we do have to conduct ourselves a certain way to keep the congregation happy, to
Mhm.
keep people coming in the door, to pay tithes, to keep the lights on, to be able to reach out to people in ministry. There's a very legitimate business aspect of it.
Mhm.
It's just hard for me to even it's and part of it I think it's for better or worse, like I am one of those people that's wired like, hey, if I'm gonna do something, like I said I wanted to start doing all this stuff like 15 years ago, and I've
Mhm.
still been doing it and arguably sacrifice way too much to do it. But that is my mindset, even though it's a lot of times unhealthy. So if being of that mindset and also having that childlike pure heart where it's like, hey, this is about authenticity, being who you are, uh yeah, being who you truly are. But then you see on the other side of it, there are people that seem like this is just a job to them,
Mhm.
or even worse, people within the church that this is about an image or this is about a lifestyle, that type of stuff. Like, so I say all to say, like, I get there are certain times in certain places where people have to be a certain way just to get stuff done. It's the
Mhm.
job that you got to do to be able to do the work. So
Mhm.
I understand that, but I just wanted to clarify, like, I understand because I could see somebody arguing like sometimes some things have to be done to
Oh
keep the
yeah,
stuff going.
absolutely.
But yeah, it's just it's weird, and I say all that to say, like, my bigger thing, that was my issue when I was younger. Like before I left Omaha, those were a lot of the issues I had. Now my thought process is like, where, just like I said, I want to at some point study religion because there's too many things, too much information that has been left out, too many things that have been changed.
Mhm.
There's too many, like I said, too many commonalities and too many stories that precede a lot of the information that we have. And there's a lot of other, things that tie into the stuff that we're not talking about. If you start talking about even like some of the stories in the Bible and some of the depictions of old time,
Mhm.
some of the stuff look like, does that tie into like aliens, and or some of these
Mhm.
things, so it's just there's so many things that I find interesting that if nothing else, you won't hear even entertained as a question
Mhm.
in the black church.
Right. I mean, a lot of times in the black church, it was God said it, I believe it, that settles it.
Hmm.
Um, but we did a youth retreat last year where we asked the question, did Jesus really say that?
Mm,
So, I mean, because there's a lot of things that we say in the we can say we've heard in the black church, like you might have heard this one, when the praises go up, blessings come down.
hmm.
That is not in the Bible anywhere.
Right, right, right. And that, I mean, that's an example of, I'm gonna call it harmless, but like a change or an alteration of something for somebody else's benefit.
And I would say it might not necessarily be harmless because
Well, just in relative to some other things, but
yeah,
yes, go
yeah.
ahead.
But what if I have that expectation of praising God and I'm
Yeah,
expecting this blessing and it
yeah,
doesn't come
yeah,
and you tell me praises go up and blessings come down and it doesn't happen, I might get upset.
yeah, yeah. Or worse, start to lose faith.
Start to lose faith. Yeah. So it is worth doing. It is worth doing the study. And I mean, we so many things in the black church have been. I don't want to just. I don't want to. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I mean, because I mean, the whole term black church kind of bothers me in itself. I mean, because Sunday is the most segregated day of the week.
I never thought about it like that, but you were right.
And one of the things that actually bothered me because I don't want to live my life. I mean, I love my black people. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I get that from my pastors at
Hmm.
church. But my world isn't only around black people.
Right.
I mean, I don't feel like I mean, I mean, that's the group I identify the most with. But when I say I want to go to church with people that look like me, I mean, I want to go to church with, yeah, people who are black, but I want to go to people with church with people who are educated, who are
Who are more like you on the inside.
exactly. I
Right.
mean, so looking like me externally is one part of that, but also having the same goals. I also want to go to church with people who have different goals.
Mhm.
I mean, I've had conversations with men who are in their 70s about, I mean, who I have very little in common with, who probably have never played basketball in their lives, but have imparted so much knowledge to me
Yeah.
because I was willing to get out of my comfort zone of the quote unquote black church
Right.
and find a space where, there's people of all nationalities and learn from them and, really change my perspective on certain thoughts that I grew up with.
Right. Yeah, no, no. Yeah, that is a whole different aspect because on a separate topic, I feel like there are so for somebody somewhere wants to divide people as many ways as they can. And I feel like one of the most divisive things has been religion.
Mhm.
Not even in the ways that it's overtly done, but just in the way like the denominations or just how the churches are split. And a lot of that clearly comes from, you know, days of like racism and all of that.
Mhm.
But also it's gonna be one of those things to where it's well, I guess it still stems from somewhat race related, but there's gonna be a certain level of comfort, a certain level of like this is how we do things. And that is one thing I will say I do appreciate about LA is the churches. I don't know if it's like a new age thing, but a lot. I mean, they're still like I the church I go to is one of the most one of the oldest, biggest black churches in LA. But I do like going to like churches that are more intermingled,
Mhm.
where it's like it's always like a younger crowd, and I think that's one thing I do appreciate. It's a younger crowd, so they're less jaded. It's better energy, but it's also more of a mixture. And because it's more youthful, the I guess for lack of a term, like the energy is just better, and you can
Mhm.
feel it, and it's more palpable.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that. Speaking to what you said,
Yeah. And I love my church now. Again, shout out to Hope Church because it is, I mean, I'm allowed to be authentic. And that's one of the things that they strive for, is like eliminating artificial barriers. Because if I went to church like this growing up, somebody would have a big problem.
yeah, absolutely.
If I went to church like this tomorrow, somebody would be like, I love your shirt.
True. Yeah, and I think part of that just is time. Like
Hmm.
I once again, I always see things like from both ways. Like I get from my parents, like they say they appreciate a time when everybody put an effort into how they dressed, and I definitely get that. But if that, as great as it is for like the representation of like anybody, but especially us, because we don't have a lot of times and ways to like look that great and like put our best foot forward like when it comes to that, if that is going to keep the people that need the word the most out of the church, then what is the goal really,
Yeah.
or what's the purpose?
Yeah. And there was a time when Sunday morning that was the time where you could do that.
That's where the term Sunday best comes from.
Sunday best, yeah. But at the same time though, I mean, I think we look all right.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely.
Uh,
But yeah, no, I clearly I do. Like I don't even, I don't try to dress up anymore. But I get it from both sides, but I think
yeah.
there has to be a space for everything and
Yeah.
for everyone.
Absolutely. So I think the church is getting I think the church that it, I'll just say the black church. I really hate that term, but I mean it's a term that exists.
Yeah.
I think even the corners getting turned there, even as far as mental health. I mean, I've had like a pastor here in Omaha, Pastor Claude White. He did a series. He's done Bible studies and series on mental health.
Mhm.
That doesn't happen 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, I've not. This is the first time I've heard that.
And I am so elated that the conversation is starting to happen in the quote unquote black church or the church period, because again, we've been behind on that. I mean, I remember the first time I came forward about, I mean, a little snippet into the book. When I came forward about my mental health, I mean, people laid hands on me and
Hmm.
prayed for me,
Hmm.
and
That was it.
that was about it. Not because they didn't care,
But that's yeah.
but that was,
That's the scope of what we do.
and I'm not even saying that it didn't do anything, but what I am saying is that a lot of time I think that it did. I mean, there was still work to be done after that,
Right.
and sometimes we might hear things, we might have heard things that were traumatic to us around the stigma, like you're not praying hard enough, you don't have enough faith, you're not doing this, you're not fasting, things of that nature. When maybe some of that might have been true, but maybe you needed to take some medicine also.
Right. Yeah. No. No. Absolutely.
I mean, and we had touched on that. Like, I mean, one of the things we had on here was like weight fluctuation and things like that from medicine. It's like, I mean, you have to. I mean, if your weight fluctuates, if you're taking medicine because of your mental health, talk to your talk to your doctor.
Hmm.
I mean, that might mean it's time to do some more exercise, because exercise, I mean, taking the pill isn't the cure.
Right.
Just like laying the hands on, I admitted I had a problem, but I still had work to do.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, taking medicine, prayer, nutrition, exercise, all of that went into the equation of recovery. And I just think that we have to be mindful of what we're taking in that's making our weight fluctuate, because I was thinking about this on the way. Our weight fluctuating isn't necessarily physical, because what we're putting in through social media, through
Hmm. Hmm.
movies and entertainment, through the people we're around, the toxic sludge that we're putting into ourselves
Right.
could be adding weight to us emotionally.
Yeah. I mean, because there's what is it? Stress and cortisol.
Hmm.
I mean, just knowing how those two things interact and can contribute to weight gain, like that within itself, let alone like whether you're whether you're stressed based on your finances, or whether you're stressed because a relationship isn't going right, or you don't feel like you're living up to these expectations that have been put on you or you put on yourself by looking at these images out there, let alone the external impact of like people when you start interacting with people, the stressors they're going to put on you.
Hmm.
There's so many different things that can add to that. But yeah, the weight fluctuation, that's a whole different thing. Like yeah, that's been a journey for me that I am still trying to figure. I will say it's funny to I won't be able to dive all the way into it now, but I remember so like when the pandemic happened, I my I wasn't my heaviest, but I was my heaviest maybe a year or so before the pandemic. And I actually I had an aunt that died like in April from COVID, which is a whole different thing now looking back at it. But in LA, we were shut down. Like you couldn't do all you
I,
could do was like walk. So like I just put it on myself to like I'm gonna start getting just healthy because I wanted to get out of the house. And like I said, it was the first time. Uh, it was the first time that I actually had time to myself.
mhm.
So I just it was the first time I had time to myself and I didn't have to worry about bills because like I couldn't pay them. So it was like, hey, nobody else could pay them. I'm not going to stress it. And
Mhm.
also, it was the first time where like I was going back to what I said before. It was the first time I was kind of crossing that barrier of wanting to be healthy out of love for myself instead of hate for myself. So like
Mhm.
I did it. And then I actually overdid it, got sick, and went to the hospital. But the crazy thing, and this is I'm glad I started like the inner work beforehand. This is gonna touch on the subject, but get off of the subject of the weight. But like I got healthy, got sick, and I was in the hospital, and then I was planning on moving back after that. And it was so weird because like I went to the hospital August of 2021, so I had like literally almost 18 months to like be to myself in the pandemic to work on my health and all that. And the health issue was an issue for like a year of that time, but like
Mhm.
it what didn't get bad to the last few months. But I had all that time to work on myself and to like internally and externally. And I tell you, literally, as soon as I moved back, like I hadn't gotten rid of my apartment, thankfully, but like I had just like flown back here maybe like a week and a half out of the hospital. And like it all went downhill from there because what I realized is, and this is what I knew, like how many issues there were within my family, because I had got a chance to like unpack a lot of stuff over that year and a half, but what I
Mhm.
realized is I got to unpack that stuff in a safe space. Like I was
Mm.
by myself. I had no other,
Mhm.
if I'm talking to any family members, it's via text.
Mhm.
But then you go back to ground zero to where all the stuff
Ooh.
started, and none of these people are probably aware that they have these issues or that they cause these issues in you,
Mhm.
let alone like they haven't changed any ways at all. And you're literally and metaphorically at one of your weakest, most vulnerable points. It's so weird. I still try to like come to terms with it because I literally like dog. I was down, like I had worked to get down to like 185 pounds, which is really, really skinny. Then my health got bad and I didn't eat for like 2 weeks, like some of my internal whatever. So like I got down like 161. I was skin and bones, like a crackhead. Like it was terrible. But I what's going on here? I worked so hard to stay alive in that time to get healthy and then stay alive.
Mhm.
And I swear to you, from September 2021 until I don't know when, sometime just recently, like in 2023, I spent so much time fighting to get healthy and then stay alive to then fighting the feeling of just wanting to die. Like it was like a total 180, and like I
Mm.
couldn't, like I know where it stemmed from, but I couldn't understand how you could go like from so hard one thing like to wanting to live so hard to just wanting to die so hard.
Mm.
And the only thing that changed, I mean, there was definitely circumstances and hardships and, a lot of tests and tribulations, but the only thing that actually changed to like set it all off was the environment. And the environment was literally just family. And it's so weird. And it's like I'm glad I have more time. And what sucks for me is like I said, my parents are older. So I'm back here because I have a client that I've been able to get on retainer with. So it keeps me coming back a few times throughout the year.
Mm.
And I do work for them, but it also allows me to spend time with my family. And I do that because every time I see my parents could be the last time. So no, regardless of how I feel and how it affects me, I still got to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was so weird to have been in what I felt such a safe space because as an introvert, as somebody that's neurodivergent, to not have all the outside noise, to just
Mhm.
be with myself and to understand myself and to work on that health, like that was so great. And then literally just being around, and it sucks because it's around the people that you should love and feel loved by the
Mhm.
most, to have that be the impetus of all of that trauma. I was like, yeah, that took a lot. And the funny thing is like that set the bad like run of depression to where like I
Mm.
gained all that way. And it's so funny because even the people that like want to hate on you, when you're getting healthy, you're like, oh man, you're gonna gain it all back. I was like, there's no way. And then literally I started gaining it all back. And I knew at least this time, like I was like conscious, like every time I eat a cookie, every time I eat
Mhm.
something else, I was like, okay, this is gonna add to this is gonna add to that. So it's like I knew, which makes it worse in some sense. Like I knew what I was doing, but it wasn't one of those things where the weight snuck up on me. It's like, okay, I know health, I'm unhealthy, I'm miserable, I'm depressed, I'm eating this, I'm eating that, this is gonna
Mhm.
equal this is gonna equal that. But I say that to say at least, like it's felt really weird. I always try to find this clip. I remember Two Chains had put one of his first really successful albums out, and he wanted to get Jay on it, and he didn't. And I remember he went to Jay, he was like, "Man, I got it. Let's make this work." And then Jay was like, "Now do it again." And that's what I felt like in life. Like I felt like in the pandemic,
Mhm.
I found like this cheat code. Like I made so much progress in my filmmaking stuff. I made so much progress in my health, physically and mentally. And I felt like God was like, "That's cool. Go do it again." And it felt like I can't think of the movie equation. The closest one is, have you ever seen Guardians 3, Guardians of the Galaxy?
Yes.
So you know when like Rocket, he's up there with Lila, he's in
Mhm.
heaven. There's like it's good, but it's not your time, and he gets kicked all the way back down.
Yep.
Like I felt like I had ascended to like this great point in life, and then God was like, go back down there and do it again. And that wrecked me for like a whole year, like 2021, so 2022, and then all this other stuff started happening. But it made me realize a couple of things. Like for one, like it's one thing to you can do something once and get lucky.
Mhm.
Um, but once you've done it a few times, like now you've built a pattern. Now you know how to do it throughout life and throughout time, and you can get back to it. So it's I'm still in the middle of it now. Like I feel like I've just kind of in the last I don't know when I was just having a conversation with my mentor last night. I speak in movie quotes. You ever seen the movie Wanted, where
Which
they
one?
like curve the bullet?
Uh-uh.
Ah, okay. Well,
Wanted, I think I have seen that, yeah.
so when he finally goes to join the group
Mm,
and they start whooping his ass.
mhm,
So at some point I felt like that's what life started doing to me, like 2021, 2022. But at a certain point he just like they kept whooping his ass.
mm,
But at some point like he got tough enough to be able to take it. So I feel like there's a couple things that happen. God was like, okay, now go back. You got to do this again for whatever reason. Learn these lessons. Because I think I was skipping steps. That's probably what it was. So like
mhm,
go back, don't skip steps, learn these lessons, do it again. But also you're gonna go through all of this while you're doing that, but it will make you tougher. Because just like anything else, when you go through a test or you go through a trial, if you actually learn the lessons, you'll be
mhm,
more prepared for whatever comes next. So that's what I'm trying to take from it. But man, that sucked with the weight because that my two biggest goals in life is like I want to be healthy, like physically,
mhm.
and like I want to like achieve my goals, like in storytelling, filmmaking, all of that stuff. And all of that was just I had built up so much, and then it just all fell apart.
Man, and then I have to try to go back and do it again, and you're just, like, worn out. It's like, I literally just did this, and it's like, you want me to go back and do it
So you
again?
feel like you did the impossible,
Yeah,
and then it's like I do it again.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
and, I mean, that comes back to story also because, I mean, one of the aspects of story is when the hero, so to speak, decides to take on the challenge.
Hmm.
And I mean, when you make that decision to take on the challenge, you know you're going to face challenges. You know you're
Hmm.
going to face obstacles and opposition.
Yeah.
And when that opposition is family,
Yeah. What I've learned, because I know we got to tie this up pretty soon, is to take it the story. Sometimes what you have to learn, well, two things, a few things. Like you only fail when you quit,
hmm
and to build on that, like a lot of times, I think we believe that like a huge hardship or a failure is like the end of the story. But in the terms of storytelling, it may just be your midpoint. You just got to get up and,
hmm
and do it again and keep climbing. But yeah, it is it's tough. That's what I've realized. Like it sucks. I was gonna say it sucks. Like I've never wanted to be that jaded person. Like I remember when I wanted to move to LA, I met somebody that was from here that spent some time out there. He did not have great things to say about LA, and I get it. But
hmm
I was like, I just never want to be that person that has that type of energy to give somebody that's young and hopeful.
hmm
I now also understand why people have that energy. But like what
hmm
I would tell people now is like, hey, if you can, whatever it is in life, if it's difficult, like if you can do something else, maybe go do that. But whatever you want to do in life, whatever it is, you can do it. You just got to be willing to put in the work. Like I don't ever want to tell anybody that anything isn't possible. But what I'm learning is it just a lot of times it just takes more work than we are willing to do,
hmm
especially like from here, like in the Midwest where things are like relatively a
hmm
little easier, but anything is possible. It's just you gotta Kobe, you gotta have that mentality where you're willing to do the work, you know.
Be willing to do the work, be willing to deal with the disappointment, be
Hmm.
able to deal with the consequences of, I mean, you might fail.
Yeah,
I
you
mean,
will fail.
you will fail. I
But
mean,
it's the failure doesn't have to be final. The failure can
yeah,
just be a lesson.
failure can just be a lesson. I mean, like, when when I think about Michael Jordan playing baseball,
Mhm.
some would say he failed, but it did was it spurred him back into it
Absolutely.
got him back into the love of basketball, which got him back into basketball, which, you know, if he hadn't come back,
He won 3 more.
do you think he'd be a billionaire now?
Probably not.
3 times over? Probably not. But the thing is, go find out.
Yep.
If you the worst feeling, the question I hate the most is what you leave a what if out there
Yep.
that will haunt you.
Yes, you're right.
And they haunt me. They still haunt me, but you know, go find out. At least you'll know.
Well, I think that's a good spot to leave it.
All right.
Appreciate you, my guy.
Appreciate you, brother.